Hey, welcome everybody to Under the Hood, Ask a Pro. My name's Tony. We're live, or actually back live, every Thursday at 3 o'clock to answer your car questions. So please feel free to ask any problems that you're having. If your car's at a repair shop or it's been at a repair shop recently and you have some questions, if you have some noises, let me know. I'll get to them here in just a few. The last couple weeks, like I said, I wasn't live last week and I had a video film for you about like the inside of an air conditioning. Then the week before that I had talking about the components. So today we're going to talk about what's going to be done if your AC system's low or if you're having problems, or if you have a problem, or what you should do. And I hinted a couple videos ago, if you haven't seen it, watch that, the cans used if your AC is low. And I recommend do not using that stuff at all. So the first thing we check here is if your AC is blowing air but not cold, and that is to check the pressures of the Freon. And what we see now, the first Freon or refrigerant we used to use was R12. We eventually got out of that system. Now we're at 134A. And newer cars now, they call it 1234YF, and it's super expensive. You can use a whole lot less of it. And between R12 and the new 1234YF, we're using less refrigerant in a system, so we're adding ounces. And that's why the cans don't work, because in this system here, it may not hold but a pound. So if it's only a couple ounces low, you can't use this trigger can of whatever gas they sell you to actually get it to the correct amount. But the first thing we need to use is either a set of manifold gauges, or we actually use our AC machine. And what that's going to tell us is where the pressures are in the system. And there's two test ports in the system. Because it's sealed, we don't know, we can't see the refrigerant, it's a gas, so we need to look at pressures. And the good thing about pressures that make it simple is they're almost a direct comparison to temperature. So if you see a low side or a temperature that's right by the evaporator core that's around 30 or 40 psi, it's pretty close to 30 or 40 degrees. So it's a good thing to know that when testing a system. Of course, you have to be licensed. It's dangerous, it can blind you, it can suffocate you. The new stuff is flammable. So I don't recommend you doing this. You're on yourself, you probably can't, but at least if you're having problems and you get a cost of a repair or recharging your system, you understand what's involved. So like I said, there's a couple of test ports. The first one we'll hook to on this car is our low side fitting. And they have these caps, and that's to protect the Schrader valve. Just like your tires, we don't want debris to get into this system here and clog it up and cause a leak. So what we'll do is we'll hook our low side fitting to it, and it has a little safety lock that you pull up, clamp to the line. Well, see if I can do it with one hand, and I can't. All right, we're going to have to put it down. You guys hang out for a little bit. All right, so it clamps to the line. What we do is we actually screw that down. And then we get a reading on our AC system through our gauges here. As you can see on this car here, turn off the light, we have 0. Nothing and nothing. So the system is low. It is a sealed system, so the question would be, why is it low? Well, we don't know at this point. Because the Freon is a gas, we can't visually see it. So say this customer comes in, AC's not blowing cold, we've hooked up our machine or we've hooked up our manifold gauges, and we know there has to be a leak. What we need to do is charge the system with a trace die to try to determine where that leak is so we can make a repair. What the machine comes into play is we start off by, if there is just a little bit of Freon, we can't release that into the atmosphere. So what we do is we evacuate the system. We pull the Freon, it's being stored in the tank. Then the next stage we do is pull a vacuum on the system. Vacuum does a couple things. It allows us to check for leaks. and also that's going to help draw out some moisture if there's any water in the system. Typically we pull a vacuum here 15 to 30 minutes, then we shut this valve off. Then we watch the gauge to see if it bleeds off. If it bleeds off, we know we have a pretty large leak. At that point, what we do is we actually charge it with some trace dye. Here, I'll show you the dye in a little bit, but here's our injector, and it goes in line just like before on the low side. It just screws on and in line with the other tool. And at that point, we open the valve, it draws in the dye, then we can charge the system. And that's where the cans don't work. So we have a completely empty system. We have a vacuum on it, so there's no air, there's no moisture, it's in a vacuum. And now we can introduce the right amount of Freon in ounces to precise. Just a little bit can make a world of difference. So we see newer cars with maybe, that only holds maybe 8 or 9 ounces. So if it's just a little low, let's say 3 or 4 ounces, well, that's, you know, almost 20% of the whole system, which can affect on really hot days. So that's why the cans don't work. If you try to shoot it with a can, you'll probably overcharge it. Now, before I can even diagnose your system, I have to hook it up to the machine and do the evac and recharge. So that $30, $40, $60 can is going to cost you at least $100. So please don't. And if you do, bring it to me, because we will be more than happy to repair it. So a couple other components we have. While we're on the, we'll talk about the Freon one more time. So we get it in a cylinder of 134A. Like I said, there's no cans. We have tons of this stockpile getting ready for the summertime, because it is. And here's the dye. Just as a fluorescent oil that mixes with the system. And what we use, so we charge the system, it's holding a vacuum, we charge it with the dye. What we use are special glasses and a black light, and go over the system to see if we have any leaks. Now, depending on the size of the leak or the system, it may not be immediate leak that we see. It could be a small leak, and we may have to have you drive it for maybe a week with this dye in it to circulate through the system to try to determine, you know, where that leak is, so we can make a repair. You know, just because you charge a system, your AC is working for, you know, a summer, and every summer you have to charge it, well, that's an expense every year you have to make, and you never know when that leak's going to get larger, then you have no air conditioning at all. So we always recommend, let's charge it and let's follow back up so we can get a repair made, so you're not having to charge a system every few months or so. When it comes to repairs, so say we have a car and it has a bad AC compressor, and we've diagnosed it with our machine, and we need to do a repair. What we have to do is use the machine to evacuate the refrigerant. Then we can open up the system and replace some components. One of the major failures that we don't want to happen, or you don't want in your car, is the compressor coming apart. So it has pistons in it. The metal can get in the system and pass through. So that sends metal throughout the whole system and actually gets in the dye or the oil, AC oil in the system. So just like an engine, those pistons and compressors have to be lubricated. So there's a special amount of this oil you have to put in, and that gets contaminated. So we need to flush it. So when you flush all that bad oil and metal out of the system, so we have a canister we fill with flush chemical. We hooked air to it, and we actually power flush all the components and all the lines throughout the system. So, and a lot of times I have people call me for estimates of AC compressors, and they're like, wow, you're so much more expensive than any other shop. That's because I'm pricing it to you the correct way an AC system should be repaired with a compressor. I can always play games with people over the phone and just price them exactly what they want, and try to do like a bait and switch to get them in the door. Then once they come in, I can say, well, now it's $800 more because of this reason. You know, I try to be, or at least I do in here, truthful with our customers, and that's what makes us different. So if another shop you're taking it to is cheaper and they don't have the knowledge to do the right repair, in another maybe 3 weeks or next year you have the same failure and over and over, and you're just spending all kinds of money because maybe the shop you have it maybe doesn't know exactly how to repair it correctly. Getting into the die, let's see if I can show you what it kind of looks like. I made a, put this back here where it's a little darker. See if I can get this lens on here and the die light. So say a car comes back after a couple weeks, we run this light over every single AC component, and as you can see, I actually just put dye on this one. It glows, you know, neon. So that's when we know, okay, to repair this car, we have to have an AC compressor because it's leaking. And that goes with all components. It could be something simple as a seal, and that would probably be, well, I always say the best case scenario, because we have tons of seals for every single car. It's got a tackle box full of all kinds of gaskets, O-rings. They take a special gasket O-ring because it is high pressure and low pressure, and the special oils in the system. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to let me know. Is there anything you want to talk about next week? I'm getting low on ideas. If you want to talk a little bit more about air conditioning, I'm sure I can get a little more technical. So please let me know. One thing, let's say, and I had this question today. A customer came in, what can I do to make my air conditioning the coldest it can be? And where I want to start is, what do you do with your car? You come out, say I'm getting ready, we'll get into this vehicle. It's a hot day, it's 90, 100 degrees outside. We get into our car and start it up, and it's hot. What we want to do is, let me set up the tripod here, get the heat out of the vehicle. And to do so, I crack all the windows. And that way any heat in the vehicle can escape. And at this point, I'm driving down the road. But once we'll turn on the AC, make sure it's starting to blow cold, yes. So we're driving down the road, we're getting a lot of heat out of the vehicle. This is when I crack, if it's a 4-door, I crack this window and I crack my back one. And I roll my other ones up. And what this is gonna do, it's any heat that's in the car is gonna be, it's gonna come through and get sucked out of there. So now I'm getting colder air in my car, starting to feel better. It's not getting as hot. Then I'll roll up the windows and I'll hit the recirculation button. Now the recirculation button on this car, let me turn down the fan speed, it's pretty loud. My button's a little worn out, but typically it's like a recycle sign with the in the car. And what that does is, instead of the HVAC system, which is behind the dash, normally it's going to suck out outside air, then cool it, then come out the vents. Well, what that button does, instead of cooling, let's say outside temps 90 degrees, instead of cooling 90-degree air, we're cooling air that's already been cooled inside the cab of the truck. So that's going to dramatically lower the temperature or the vent temps in the car. Fords will, and I'll show you on this car out here, they'll have a max AC button. And what that does is it turns the recirculation door on for you to lower the air conditioning. So we had someone in today that was like, well, it was colder when I picked it up, but now it's not as cold. What did you, oh, that button. And what's that button for? This Ford here will have max AC. So the only difference between this face and here is it's going to turn the recirculation door on and cool that air. The reason I don't use it at the very beginning is because it's hotter inside the car or the truck than than it is on the outside. So see if anyone has any questions. Well, I guess if no one has any questions, we'll go. Next week I'll be back live at 3 o'clock, so tune in. If you're driving around, if you're going to Louisville for the Derby, be safe. There's a lot of people on the road, so hope everyone has a great week. Drive safe. Bye.